Hi, this is Misha, and today we're going to look at another product from Legion USA. And this exact variant is an exclusive for Ozark Bear Arms, my store, so I thought we would just talk about it. These are the Russian, or I really should say Soviet Russian, AKM rifles, assembled by Legion. From mostly all original Russian parts, and really all major serials were matched, and the minor ones have a really good chance of matching if they're serialized at all. We had about a dozen of these come in, and I just pulled 2 of them out. Here we have a 1973 Izhevsk. It's a relatively late production. They would stop manufacturing the AKM in Russia by 1977, but really they would scale back production significantly after 75, as the AK-74 was starting to come online. And here we have a 1970 Tula. So basically late mid-production, a little earlier on. Now these are built as your quintessential AKMs. We have a Russian parts kit with the original wood furniture. Now there's some variations, of course, between manufacturers and production time. Izhevsk, generally speaking, tends to have lighter colored wood. It's more of the red shading to amber and kind of brown, whereas your Tula, I'm going to actually move these guys because I need to talk about some, generally speaking, will have darker wood, more of a, I've heard some people call it blood red, so a darker red shading to a darker brown. And that's not to say there can't be light wood Tulas, but it just seems like they tend to run a little bit darker. Also, and I have some examples, the combs on the stocks tend to be just a little bit different in the way they're cut here, and really where they interface with the receiver. This is more squared on a lot of the Izhevsk, it's more rounded off on the Tulas. Just small differences like that between manufacturers. You get the earlier guns, you're going to have, of course, a few earlier features, such as the machined bolt carrier. You'll have the machined gas block still. You'll have the later style machined front sight base with the full lightning cuts. I'm going to point this at you. See the full cut here, and the full cut on the opposite side here. You'll still have the machined handguard retainer, flip it around, sling mount. I switched on this says. You still have the machined rear sight, of course. You'll have the typical takedown catch, smooth on top, and you'll have this sling swivel in the very traditional AKM location. Also have Bakelite pistol grip. As you get on later in production, you'll start to see some economies and changes in parts. Now we have a cast gas block, front sight base. You can see the fronts cut a little differently. Often has a little bit more jagged edges from the casting process. Since this isn't a weight bearing part, and this would be very similar to the early style sight bases found on the AK-74. Likewise, we have a cast gas block here. This is pretty unique to Russia. Poland would also go to the cast AKM gas block. It's kind of a combination of the original 45 degree and the later 90. And again, the early AK-74s would use a very similar gas block. Likewise, the handguard retainer would go to being cast. It's more rounded on the sling attachment point. The bolt carrier would go to being cast. And the dust cover would start to get more of a lip here. And again, this would be on early AK-74s. That's just to keep the safety from riding up. Now on the 74, they'll also add a dimple here to further allow that. And even some of the rear trunnions would start to go to cast in the 70s in Russia. But the front trunnion would always remain forged on these, of course, as would the bolt. Moving back on the stock, you notice the sling swivel is no longer directly on the bottom. Instead, it's on the side towards the bottom, much like on the AK-74. Really the difference between this stock and a 74 stock is they put the lightning cuts in the 74 stock, obviously to lighten it, but also for easy and immediate distinguishing between AKM and AK-74. And these would also have the smooth steel butt plate with the trapdoor instead of the rubber or the ribbed butt plate of the 74. It's just interesting to me to look at the late AKMs and see how a lot of the parts carried over to the early 74s. And these rifles we received from Legion were all 70s dated, starting with 1970 and up to 74 is the latest one I've seen so far. So it's kind of, they all run in that range, 70, 74. I mean, there might be a 75 in there, but it gives you the idea. So that's the parts here. The builds themselves, we are on a Childers receiver. We have XY stampings, as you see. We have the larger weld spots found on military style guns. There's no scope rail because most of your earlier AKs, AKMs, AK-74s just didn't have scope rails. It just wasn't really something they did. They would only add them for specialty purposes. Flipping it over, we have Russian selector markings. Let me flip this up, along with all three detents. Kind of neat to replicate the look. Obviously this is semi only in the middle position, so no worries. As I said, we have a Russian parts kit. These are usually in very good plus condition. As you see, there's a little bit of wear on the wood on this one. Most of the wear, it looks really to be from storage, probably the demilling process. I'm sure these guns were refurbished at least once or twice in Russia. It seems like all of the guns were, you know how the Russia likes to do the refurb, but these came out of Russia. Major parts will be matching. For example, the trunnion. Flip it back over for you. Matches the bolt carrier and the bolt. Now, dust covers will generally match, but as time would go on, beginning 73, 74, they would stop serializing the dust covers in Russia. So quite a few of these have unmarked covers. It's also possible they were just replacement covers in military service. The gas tubes may or may not match. I haven't disassembled them all to check. The ones I have do match. And the rear sights usually don't have a serial on them. I don't think this one does, I'm not sure. And that might not match just because usually if there is a number, it's an E-pinned number. So sometimes the small little bits may not match, probably don't even have serials, but the major ones will. The barrel, now this is what makes this a little different. The typical Legion gun is built on a Green Mountain chrome-lined barrel made in the USA. These are built with the cold hammer-forged chrome-lined mountains manufactured by FB-Radom in Poland. So that was one thing they did. They've also updated their finish a bit. It's not exactly Russian, but it's a darker, shinier, more consistent finish than they were doing earlier in the summer. So that's a good thing. It's not parkerized, it is a paint type finish. It just tends to be a little bit lighter than the Russian paint and not quite as glossy. But it is still glossier than it used to be, and we have more consistency between the parts. So the finish has been improved and is really close. Something to remember about finishes on these guns too, on the Russian guns. They themselves in Russia did not use the same exact paint and finish techniques from the 60s all the way through today. So the finish, for example, on a Sega, which is taken off the AK-74M, will be different than the finish applied to an AKM made in the 60s in Russia. So they themselves would change their paint a little bit over time. So there's a few different Russian finishes depending on the era. Really, these are just typical AKMs. Actually quite smooth and nice pull. All the parts will be Russian, regardless. The recoil spring, even the trigger is a Russian Molot semi-automatic trigger, which is nice. Trigger guard's Russian, of course. Like I said, these are complete Russian kits, less barrel and receiver. And this, of course, is mostly aimed at collectors, although there's not a reason in the world you couldn't shoot one of these, and should, because it is still a kit build, even if it is a Russian kit build with the correct style receiver and barrel. Trigger is military trigger. Anyone who has a unaltered Molot, you know, with the thumbhole stock, with the original Molot trigger, knows what I'm talking about. They're not bad triggers at all, and they really are. They're machined triggers, so theoretically you could polish them up. They're not gritty at all. They're very smooth, but they have a certain heavy break point. About right there. See, it stages very lightly and then kind of breaks like a glass rod. I think that's kind of the style Arsenal is trying to go for with their trigger group that they started doing around 2006, but it did never work out that way because they were using cast triggers. Now these guns will typically ship with one 30-round magazine. You will get a bayonet with them. It will match the factory. For example, this is a Tula here. Typical correct era bayonet. You will also get a sling. These are, at least looking at the ones we pulled out, original dated slings. This one's a 70s dated. Another one we pulled out was dated 89. So the slings will probably be original 70s and 80s, but if there's one of the new Russian slings in, you know, that's also a possibility. But you will get a sling with this. Russian, one way or the other. And these also come, if I can get it out without pinching my fingers. That one's stuck, guys. Let me get this other one out. I think this one comes out easier on this gun. There we go. With the an original Russian cleaning kit that will be in the buttstock. And of course there's a manufacturer's warranty from Legion for any issues. So there are some accessories these come with. The bayonet I think is particularly interesting. Here's the Izhevsk bayonet. But yeah, I just thought we would shoot and show you this gun. I thought it was worth talking about. The RPK we showed earlier, well, I guess now it's 2018 by the time this video goes up. So the RPK we showed from Legion last year has proven over the months to be a good, solid shooter. And so we were happy enough with that we decided to do this kind of run with them of the AKMs. The reason we did a special run, I had some of their standard AKMs with the Green Mountain barrels, and my customers really liked them, but they kept saying if only they would use the Polish barrels and improve the finish a little bit, because the earlier finish was coarser, not shiny, and kind of a upper and higher in the gray range. So with a little bit of tinkering, I think we've gotten a little closer to what people are wanting. I plan on keeping one of these myself because there were no true Russian AKM imports, and guns like the Vepr and the Sega aren't AKMs. The Vepr is based on the RPK, of course, or RPK 74 if you have that caliber, and the Sega was based on the AK-100 series, which are different. The AK-100 is an outgrowth of the AK-74. RPK, of course, is a light machine gun. The AKM has its own features. For history on the AKM and variants, we have plenty of other videos featuring it. So this video is just on the Legion USA gun that was built as a custom contract for Ozark Bear Arms. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. Also, I have a request to anyone out there in YouTube land. I know that, early would be the machined part, late would be the cast parts, so on and so forth. But if anyone has more exact dates, for example, when Izhevsk switched to the cast gas block, or when Tula switched, I know they did it at different times. If anyone has actual dates or even just rough estimations, that would be really great. I looked over the internet for the last 6 months and there's really nothing. There's a nice guide for the parts changes for the AK-74, which was great when we were doing the AK-74 video, but I don't know of a guide for the Russian AKM. So if anyone has exact information, I would love to talk about that either in the comments, or if you've got a document or a link, feel free to email me at ozarkbeararms@gmail.com, because I'd really like to get more information exactly when the changes happened. Appreciate that if you do. If you liked the video, appreciate that if you'd click like there too. And as always, please tune in again next time for hopefully more interesting content. This is Misha, and we'll catch you then.